Hey guys, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a transfer plan video looking ahead towards Game Week 31 and the team selection there. But let's actually set the scene with my Game Week 30 team review. Ultimately, I think for a lot of people who owned Martinelli, it would have been a fantastic week, or those, of course, equally who owned Haaland and brought him in, because for the first time in a long time, I think owning Haaland and captaining him became a differential. So that was really positive this week, and I'm glad we made that transfer away from Tony. A little bit fortunate, of course. I mean, there were some fantastic plays and chances for other assets to do well. Rashford had many ample opportunities. Salah himself and Tony, of course, didn't necessarily need to miss the penalty, but he did, and we are very fortunate to that. But I would say we were equally unfortunate with someone like Mitoma, and there were some negatives, of course, this week too. So whilst Mitoma was a positive and McAllister was a positive, and of course Brighton unfortunately had to take the brunt of what was the negativeness of VAR, I think Maddison clearly is a sore thumb in this team. He is a pretty terrible asset simply because Leicester have been so shocking. And the reality is Leicester are a team now, when you look at home and away, when you look at all fixtures included, they are the worst team in the league from a defensive point of view and even an offensive point of view at times, comparable to a team like Bournemouth. But more recently, they have been significantly worse than a team like Bournemouth, who have shown good attacking numbers, whereas Leicester seem to be getting worse and worse. And during a run of games where, for example, getting to play Bournemouth at home in the previous week, them struggling so much and Maddison, of course, playing so poorly too, just makes the transfer look worse. And I'm quite happy, of course, that Saka, who was the transfer out for Maddison because of the benching news, actually got 1 point this week. So I guess all in all, it's been a zero transfer, really, a net zero. And the transfer plan, of course, has to orientate around Maddison first. However, we also have injury situations with Rashford, and of course Shaw was sitting out of this game versus Everton, so that was a little bit unfortunate that we couldn't really capitalize on a clean sheet for Shaw, something that we intended to do by going for Shaw in the previous week for a hit. However, the hope is that Shaw can come back, but I have made some transfer plans in my mind if Shaw was not able to play. If we look at, of course, the team and just reviewing it, I'm quite happy to be in a 66k position for now. I hope I can continue pushing with that, and I think the free hit is going to be essential in terms of determining my final rank for the season. I think going for a free hit with the mix of differentials and great assets like the Arsenal assets and picking the correct 3 Arsenal assets is going to be the tough task, really, because a lot of us are going to be looking at the Liverpool game and still looking at assets like Martinelli and Jesus as nailed on assets in the free hit in 32, but you also have to consider that Arsenal are very capable of keeping a clean sheet as well, particularly given that Southampton have been pretty poor from an offensive point of view. Looking at the team as well, we saw a Chilwell blank this week, so that's going to be one of the problem points, and he is also sticking out like a sore thumb too because of the Frank Lampard appointment. They were overwhelmed actually in the Wolves game. I thought, yes, whilst Mateus Nunes scored a really, really tough chance, and Chelsea have actually overperformed, I would say, from a defensive point of view in recent weeks. The fear really is in this back four structure that they might not find the defensive solidity that they would like. And of course, they're going to play versus Real Madrid. There will be rotation as well. And now Chilwell is subject to it. So that's a huge concern. But let's actually move towards my transfer plans, at least in terms of the initial free transfer and how to use that. My first transfer plan and my move is going to be either from Rashford or Maddison towards a Grealish. And that's because I'm on a 3-hit 32 template. Grealish could, of course, be another Man City midfielder. You could opt to go for someone like a Mahrez. You could also opt to go for someone like a Gundogan. However, one of the issues with Gundogan, I think, is that he can play multiple different roles for this Man City team. You could be looking at a Gundogan who plays a much more midfield role, and also the Gundogan that we love from old, who used to make these kind of deep lying runs in the box. However, he could also play a very measured game, a role where he kind of sees the game out. And that was sort of the case with the Southampton game later in the game when you saw substitutions come in. And that's the risk, I would say, with Gundogan, even though I think he's more nailed than someone like Mahrez, who has to share his minutes with the Champions League, really, when it comes to the Premier League. As far as Grealish, I think that if you look at the minutes as of late, and specifically due to Foden's injury concerns, that he is the best asset to go for. First of all, he sort of locks down this left wing position. I think Pep clearly has faith in him, and now he's actually converting these minutes into numbers, right? Goals and assists is what we were looking for from someone like Grealish, even though the underlying numbers were all right. He is now so much more confident at actually looking at shots on target and also creating opportunities for his teammates, as opposed to playing this sort of very defensive role where he drives the ball towards the edge of the box and kind of keeps it in play, plays it back to someone like KDB. You now see him driving at defenses. He is almost sometimes the last man for the City team, especially when KDB spreads that ball down the left flank. So I really love Grealish as an option. I think he should be a great transfer. However, if you aren't going for 3 at 32 or you don't have a free hit, then I think it is understandable to go towards a Saka or Martinelli this week, going back to a Saka if you went out of him previously, or going to Martinelli now. Now, Trossard and someone like Jesus, of course, are going to start eating into Martinelli's minutes because of the threat of rotation. But Martinelli is on some scintillating form. He looks exceptional, both in terms of his ability to create from the left-hand side, but also his ability to make these deep-lying runs as that sort of last man when Arsenal are on the counter-attack. We saw a beautiful goal in the Arsenal game, very reminiscent of Martinelli early in the season when he was making these counter-attacking runs. The United game, for example, at Old Trafford comes to mind because that was a disallowed goal where Martinelli was that sort of last man, even when Jesus is in that structure as a striker. However, when we look at the midfield moves, it really has to come back down to either Rashford or Maddison. With Rashford, I think the concern is what the state of the groin injury is. We will get some news because Man United will be involved in the fixture versus Sevilla in the midweek. So we'll get a little bit of news as to, let's say, whether it's a grade 1 or grade 2 injury and what the sort of timeline is for Rashford to come back. And we just saw Haaland, of course, come back quite quickly from a groin injury. But of course, keep in mind there was the international break. There is a high chance, I would say, that Rashford is going to miss out this weekend. But in my team, I would say Maddison is so much worse of an asset and actually more expensive, holding more transfer value in my team, that it still makes sense for me to go Maddison out. However, if the Rashford news is very, very negative, such as he's not even going to make it towards Gameweek 34, then I might move Rashford first into Grealish. But still, as I said, because Maddison looks so poor and Leicester looks so poor equally, it's almost like holding someone who isn't going to return for the next few weeks. Now, of course, Maddison could shock the world, show his world-class finishing once again, because he has been a top finisher for the last many, many years in football. He could score, of course, for City, but I think the chances are that Grealish is going to be a much better transfer regardless. I will get more money back, and I will also have the chance to make a secondary move. So if I take the line of play where I go from Maddison to Grealish, I might even be tempted to make a second move, and that's going to be from Chilwell to Trent. Now, a lot of you with better transfer value might have the opportunity to go from Shaw to Trent as well. I don't have very, very good transfer value, so I unfortunately have to go from Chilwell to Trent. But Chilwell to Trent still makes sense to me this week because Brighton at home still strikes as a terrible fixture, even if you're to own a Chelsea asset. Not to mention that I already own Kepa as a keeper, and if I was probably to play someone between Kepa and Steele, I'd still back the home side here. So I just don't really want Chelsea double defense, especially when I'm going for the Brighton midfielders and probably likely to play them. So I like Trent because he looked exceptional in the Arsenal game. Now, it's the classic case of Trent this season where he is part of a shambolic defense, and he is one of the problems in the shambolic defense. However, he brings so much in the offensive edge, and you could see that in that second goal that Robert Firmino scored, but also just the overall chances that Trent was able to create, the crosses that he was able to spread to sort of diversify the play for Liverpool. I do think he's going to be a transfer sooner than later for me. And because I don't really have the structure to go towards Salah now, as I would love to keep Kane in my team, I do think taking a hit from Chilwell to Trent makes sense for me. If you could go out of Shaw to Trent, it would only really be if, let's say, Shaw's injury was actually worse than imagined. And if we got a press conference from Erik ten Hag suggesting that Shaw is going to be out for a longer term. Because for me, I would love to play Shaw. And I'd probably avoid the hit if Shaw is only going to miss this Nottingham Forest game. Because on Game Week 32, I'm playing the free hit. And hopefully he's going to be back as soon as Game Week 33. And I could use Shaw in my team until the season ends. Very similar to the logic of keeping someone like Rashford in my team. So that's going to be the prevailing logic there, whether Shaw is going to be out for long term. Therefore, if you can afford someone like Trent or even someone like Robertson, but my concern with players like Robertson and Van Dijk is, first of all, Robertson, the chance of rotation, and then with Van Dijk also just simply lack of form. I mean, he looks terrible, if we're being honest, and Konate actually is probably their best centre-back at this moment in time. He also costs quite a lot, so it doesn't really feel good going to someone like Virgil van Dijk. And Trent, of course, recently got a rotation and got rested, but I feel like that's not going to happen once again too soon, whereas Robertson might again be hit with the rotation errors. And so if we move towards my team selection this week, I'm going to round out my team like so. I'm going to put the captaincy on Haaland. I'm going to put the vice captaincy on Kane. They simply have the two best fixtures this week, both at home, both fantastic fixtures, versus two of the worst defenses in the league, particularly away from home. And then you've got a bunch of other assets here that are playing away from home, but still have fantastic fixtures. Zinchenko is someone that I would still love to play because for me, West Ham are going to also be involved in Europe, so there's going to be the chance of rotation there, and they might even see it as a game where it's going to be very tough to get points away from Arsenal. This Arsenal team will be hungry, of course, to get the 3 points back the next game round, now that they've actually drawn and only taken 1 point away from Anfield. And then Trippier and Shaw, these two assets, of course, I'd love to play if they can actually start. And Shaw, of course, is going to be the big question mark here. Now, if Shaw misses this game, then I'm more than likely actually going to take that hint that I mentioned for Trent, and then I'm going to execute that -4, put Chilwell on on the ice really, and sell him for Trent, and then actually put Shaw on the bench, hoping that I don't really need to call upon anyone else. Worst case scenario, I have Botman coming as an auto sub. Now, Grealish is going to be one of the concerns where with the overhang of Bayern Munich and of course the two legs there, he might be rested in the Premier League, but I feel like the issue with City is the lack of depth in that left wing position and no one being able to sort of play the role that Grealish is currently able to do right now for this team. So therefore, Grealish for me is the most sensible transfer, something that I'm locking in irrespective of what the news is for Rashford and Maddison. He's going to come into my team. Fernandes is someone I'm going to reluctantly play, but the positive, of course, is that Casemiro is coming back. So the chances of Fernandes actually going to get a goal or assist contribution is very high now. And now I'm quite confident to actually play Fernandes. As far as Matoma and McAllister, really can't see Chelsea keeping a clean sheet here. They looked exceptional versus Spurs away. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for them to actually hopefully get the goals and assists that they were actually robbed of really from the refereeing committee and VAR. So that's going to be my team, a 3-4-3 next week, and hopefully another green arrow looking ahead. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys shortly.